So that's the briefest version of what I do.
Nice. All right, well, welcome everybody to the show. We've got a great show for you tonight, and I did want to actually play our new intro that I was going to have line up. Please silence your cell phones before the show, Ron. But I was going to play this intro before we went live, and then we were just live. So, anyways, let's play the intro. You're tuned in to Around the Lens, the internet's only live streaming roundtable discussion podcast, featuring Zach Roberts, Ron Hamilton, Travis Keys, and your host, David J. Murphy. Okay, and we're back. So hopefully that worked. If it doesn't, then let us know in the comments. Anyways, we've got a great show for you. We're talking with Josh primarily about your work. And I want to pull it up here first so we can start talking about it. Let's start and talk about your Time #1 photograph of 2018. Let me just pull that up. Will this work? Please work. There we go. Okay, great. So we are looking at your photograph of Stevante Clark, brother of Stephen Clark, as he addresses fellow protesters in response to the police shooting of his brother in Sacramento on March 28th. Stephen was fatally shot 10 days earlier. So why don't you go and talk to us a little bit about this photograph, Josh? What's going on here?
Sure. So I'm not seeing it on my screen at the moment, but I know the photo very well since I took it. So I can tell you that basically this gentleman, Stefan Clark, he was shot and killed by police officers. He was shot in the back 6 times at his grandmother's home, and he was unarmed. And so this, among many other unarmed victims of police shootings, sent people into a rage. This was in Sacramento, California. People were very upset and started protesting in the streets. This particular photo is his brother, Stevante Clark, who kind of became sort of the gravitational center of this particular protest movement. People sort of surrounded him. He had like a very sort of loud energy, I guess. He was walking around with a megaphone and screaming and yelling and crying and everything in between. You can imagine how frustrated this guy was. So in this photo, he was just going through a variety of emotions, and people were sort of supporting and cheering and yelling and doing everything else. So that was just kind of a brief moment when he was expressing himself.
Nice. And how did it feel to, first of all, how did you get this assignment? Were you covering this story like for extended period of time, or was this just something you were told down to go cover this, and you just found this in the midst of the protest?
I had been covering this for a couple of days. So typically how it works for me or for freelance news shooters is we'll either get assigned from the agency that we have a relationship with, or as freelancers, we can call and pitch a story. In this instance, I was assigned. So I was up there in the Sacramento area. The protests had been going on for a couple of days. There was a funeral that happened during that time. Various marches where people would go like toward the police station and around the city and near the courthouse and places like that. So there was a small ability to plan in that we knew that these protests were happening in advance, but we did not know what was going to happen at the protest. So getting there is kind of half the battle, and then otherwise it's just kind of going with the flow and shooting what happens.
Yeah. How did it feel to have your photograph chosen as part of Time's Top 100 of the year?
It's awesome. I think there's a lot of really talented shooters out there, and there's some pretty phenomenal work. So it feels good to be a part of that. I think that it was definitely nice to have something that was not just fire related. Time used 2 of my photos. One was an aerial of burned neighborhood from the campfire, and then there was this one as well. So it was cool to see a couple of different stories in that selection.
Absolutely. And I didn't see any of the photos from the campfire in here, but in the Washington Post side, which I'm going to bring up now, this is a photo called, oh my gosh, it's called Morning Stephen Clark. And you shot it. It's basically two gentlemen. I don't have the caption right in front of me, but it's basically one. It's a gentleman who's embracing another one who's wearing an American flag / camouflage flag. It looks like
Right.
It looks like probably a woman that he's consoling. Can you tell us a little bit about this photograph?
Sure. So this was generally the same. It's the same kind of story in that people are really upset over what was happening with the shooting. There were a lot of people that showed up to go to this church where people were going to pray and show their respects and whatnot. And unfortunately, we weren't allowed inside. So we had to just kind of stand outside and watch people show up, watch people leave. And so it was challenging to get that emotion, because most of the time that emotion is going to happen inside the church,
right,
or where the memorial was. In this circumstance, there were at least a couple hundred people that were lined up waiting to go inside. So I just kind of went and was working the line a little bit, and I found that I had a long lens with me. I had I think it was I have a 150 to 600 Tamron lens. It's not super fast, doesn't have very good bokeh, but it allows me to shoot scenes from really far away. I can't remember if I either shot it with that or with my 300, but I definitely used a longer lens on this one than my normal 70 to 200. So that allowed me to sort of like spy certain scenes that without like, making people uncomfortable by being right up in their face. I caught this hug and just like fired on burst mode and was able to grab this moment right as the guy looked at me. So that's kind of how that happened.
Sometimes photographers, photojournalists, they kind of don't want the subject to be looking at them, just because now you're sort of part of the photo in a way. It's like now the subject has noticed you, although obviously you're not doing anything to get the subject's attention. Your presence there has now, captured the subject's attention. Says that, but you wanted him, or obviously this is a more powerful image because he's looking at you. But do you have any thoughts on that sort of mentality, or is there anything you take in consideration with regard to ethics? Like, for instance, I remember we were looking at some other person's work, and they caught this wonderful image of these kids laughing and stuff like that. And I asked, why are they laughing? And they're laughing at me, because I'm there and I'm taking their picture, and they're just, because people get giddy and people get weird when a camera's around, right? So is that ethical, right? Is that, or where is the is there a gray area there? Is there a line? What do you think about that?
It's a really good question, because arguably a photojournalist's job is to document the scene in as truthful a way as possible. And we don't want to influence the scene. Obviously, it would be completely unethical to say, like, I want you to go and do this thing, and then you don't indicate that in the caption that was done. So typically I try and get photos where people are not looking directly at the camera, because if they are looking directly at the camera, it's usually more of a portrait. However, on some occasions, they can be looking at the camera and it just sort of works. It's kind of rare and not as common for me to file those photos. Typically, I'd rather get somebody that's kind of like looking up, or looking, even like if the camera's here and they're looking just slightly off camera, that's usually better. But like I said, in some cases that works. In terms of the ethics question, I'd love to think that we could be considered invisible and as inconspicuous as possible. But the reality is photographers are in the scene. And as much as we want to try not to influence the scene, just by existing in that space, there is going to be some kind of an effect. We know that people are going to acknowledge that we're photographers. And there's not really much you can do about that. So, notwithstanding that side of it, the goal is really a matter of intent. if we can intend on not affecting the scene and doing everything that we can to avoid affecting it, then it stays kind of within that ethical line. But if something happens naturally and we didn't tell the person to do that, for example, let's say a subject comes up and they angrily approach the photographer and they start like holding up a fist and something is happening, and that photographer makes a photo and that becomes a story and that photo gets filed. Granted, that would never have happened if that photographer wasn't there, but there's a presumption that the photographer is not going to be egging them on, trying to get them to come up to the camera. It's supposed to be as natural a scene as possible. So that's kind of my take on that.
No, I think as long as you're not directing people in the scene, then
right,
to the degree possible, don't affect the scene.
And if you do direct them, you have to disclaim it. You have to say it in the caption.
Right.
Or you should.
Exactly.
Well, I think
so and so poses for a photo, right? Yeah.
Right.
We talked about this a while back. There was a photograph. It was a scene where people were mourning at some tragic incident, some bombing or something, some shooting or whatever, and the photographer was, I guess, had seen this girl placing a flower or teddy bear or something at the grave area or the mourning site or the memorial area, and I guess the photographer asked him to do it again or something like that, and that was obviously hugely unethical.
It's pretty bad.
I do want to bring up the other photograph that you mentioned from Time. Sorry, I didn't bring this up before. Let me just bring this up really quick. So obviously this is from, and I'm sorry I can't show it to you all, but it's from the same Time Top 100. This is from, again, the campfire. A neighborhood in Paradise lies in ruins on November 15th. The campfire tore through to the houses, apartment buildings, and stores. So talk to us a little about this photograph, because it, unless are you in a helicopter? Are you shooting this from a drone? How'd you get the shot?
Okay, so this is interesting. This shot was done from a drone, and I think it's really important to mention that if any of you listening plan on using a drone at a fire, don't. It's really like a big no-no to use a drone during a fire. In fact, almost like clockwork, firefighters, CAL FIRE, and other agencies will put out a TFR, temporary flight restriction, so that you cannot fly a drone, because if a drone is even spotted in the air during a fire, it can impede firing operations and cause aircrafts to land. Then they can't fight the fire, and you could even down an aircraft. It's really bad. However, in this circumstance, we had coordinated with CAL FIRE and a couple of other agencies to set up a brief opening of that TFR. So they set up a window for us at a specific time. We only had 2 hours. They told us to meet at the formerly Safeway, I say formerly because it burned down, former Safeway parking lot at 7 a.m. We had 2 hours, and they kind of monitored us. We had to stay in that parking lot, and wherever we could go with those 2 hours is where we could go. And obviously we had to stay within our normal altitude restrictions. But I was able to take a number of photos during that time, which was kind of a rare circumstance to be able to get smoldering remains during the fire, because usually you can't get up into the aerial views until after the fire is well done, and so that was interesting.
And what drone did you use for this?
I have a Mavic Pro. I really pushed the limits too, because of the terrain. I'm not sure what else, but I tried to go as far as I could. And right when I hit about 2,000 feet away from my location, I started losing signal, and it would flash and say lost connection. At one point, I had no communication with the drone whatsoever, and I'm I thought I lost it.
Just
for
kind
sure.
of pray.
And then
please come home. Please come home.
yeah, the auto return to home thing happened, and I'm just looking around, wondering if I'm gonna get my drone back or what. And it came back, and then I did it again. And that's when I got this photo. So I was really nervous and taking a lot of risk in terms of losing my drone to try to get that shot. I actually looked on Google satellite maps while I was flying to try to find the highest concentration or the densest area of homes on the map, because I figured that would best tell the story. Because from a drone, you can't really go higher than 400 feet.
Right.
So
Legally.
really, it's hard to see the scale of this unless you can see a lot of properties. So that's what I was going for in that.
Well, I mean, Travis, legally, right? I mean, but if they called off the TFR, I don't see why you couldn't raise that drone up as high as you wanted to go. Just take off all the security features, because I've taken mine up like at least a mile or a couple thousand feet up in the air, as high as it'll let me go, like the complete ceiling, to get that sort of as high as you can get overhead shot.
Well, yeah, you were definitely playing with distance too. So if you play with height and distance, you probably wouldn't have gotten it back.
Right? Yeah.
You can, in certain circumstances like that, stitch some photos together and kind of recreate the span of it by just stitching some photos together.
But not for news. For photojournalism, you can't do that.
Absolutely, no. Yeah.
And also, like, when it comes to filing photos on the wire, it's really, really important to stay within the rules. Like, if I was just doing hobbyist stuff and the photos weren't really going anywhere, that's one thing. But like, if it's going to go out all around the world, like, I don't want to make the agency I'm working for or anybody else liable.
Yeah. Because even if you had all the rights and whatever, someone would have tried to call it out and it would have caused attention.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, I can look at a photo and know right away, like, there's no way that's under 1,000 feet or whatever, Yep.
You're seeing these drone shots more and more in these. I see them all the time in these compilations. Ever since obviously the advent of easily accessible drones. I've got the Mavic Pro as well. I love that thing. Take it up whenever I get the chance. It's tougher and tougher nowadays because obviously all the major agencies have gotten more wise to people having drones, and they have to, because you keep on hearing a story every other day of the week about some drone that's like, they got shut down in an airport because some drone is flying around. It's just
But you usually find out post on these things is that it's not what it was meant to be. A lot of times, like they're not even sure that one that got shut down, the drone that hit it was a drone. So I mean, a lot of times they call foul. So they're so quick to call foul on it, but a lot of times it's not what it's to be.
We're coming out of like the Wild West time of drone restrictions, right? I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like it's trial and error. Like until a major accident happens, it's going to be allowed, and then once something really bad happens, then nobody's going to be allowed to do it anymore. So I think that this type of like access that we have now is going to be, I don't think it's going to last forever.
Yeah, well, they're starting to put in safety features like parachutes and stuff like that on, and so you get some of these. I just read some article about they were shooting over some huge crowd, and that's what they had as a safety feature on it, so it could deploy and land safely in case.
Right.
Well, I think you'll see more and more the requirement to be certified to fly a drone, as opposed to them sort of just kind of using the honor system and telling you, hey, check the app before you fly. I think it's going to be something where it's like if you're flying and you're not certified, then that's going to be a crime right there. If they catch you and you're not certified. I know a friend of mine who runs a drone business, and to run a drone business officially and legally, there's a lot of different FAA requirements you have to go through to be certified. So I think they're just going to apply that to anyone who wants to fly a drone professionally. So they're like, let's say you produced this shot, right, and you didn't have the right certifications. Well, now you have evidence of you using a drone, right? So, but no, I think it's more prevalent in these compilations. I see them all the time, even the last couple of years, and it's pretty neat. So this was this stills you captured, or were you shooting video and then you took a still frame?
So I was just doing stills.
Okay. Did you shoot any video as well, or you just focused on stills?
I didn't. I mean, the connection was so bad. The timing was so short on this. I was like really stressing just to be able to like get some compelling still images. If I had all day out there and I could go where I wanted, then, it would have been no problem. But my primary objective is to get solid still photos. That's what I'm hired for. If I happen to be like, I actually had some people ask if I was able to get video, and if I had time I would have, but it wasn't my primary purpose, so I didn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, with the Mavic Pro, beyond just obviously the limited amount of time you had to shoot, you also have a limited battery life, unless you have multiple batteries with you.
I did. I have 3 batteries and a car charger. So while one was up, I was charging. I would rotate them out. So one's flying, and then when it comes down, I would start charging the other one and continue. So in theory, I should have been able to continue going, but sometimes it takes a while to like get everything up and running and to figure out your lay of the land and stuff once you're going.
Yeah, and if you're going after one type of shot to switch to go to video and photo, you don't know if your settings have been changed, and you really kind of have to commit to one or the other if it's that serious a shot to get.
And I even had one of my batteries basically broke, where I had an error message come up and it said battery error, replace battery. So I had to take one of the batteries out of commission. And at one point I had exhausted 2 batteries. I had because remember, this was a 2-hour window.
Right.
So I had gotten, I don't know, I got some shots, nothing spectacular yet, but I got a couple of good shots. And I was and I was charging one of my batteries so that I could get back up in the air. And while I was waiting, I was filing photos and putting them out on the wire, which was good because those got out first. And I just couldn't fly during that time. So it was like a lot of stuff happening at the same time.
Wow. Do you think you'll be upgrading to the Mavic Pro 2 or another drone?
I'll probably wait till I break mine, which actually just happened. I just busted. I just busted it.
Oops, or you lose it.
I did, but the cost to repair it was less than buying a new one, so I'm going to keep using it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, these drones, they're kind of like GoPros, where it's like you get a good enough GoPro, you really don't need a new GoPro. Like I've still got the Hero 4. It shoots 4K video if I want to do video, and I'm like, good enough. I'm compelled by the new GoPros. I like the new drones, but I barely use my Mavic Pro as it is, so I can't really justify getting another one. Maybe when they come out with like 8K drones. Although I am, I love that the new one has the zoom feature, because I've seen some people do some pretty neat shots with the zooming and the moving and stuff like that. Let's
2 different versions.
Yeah. Let's roll into since we're talking about the forest fire. Let's roll into your kind of talking about disasters and covering disasters in general. We've had people who've talked about covering forest fires before, but I want to get from your perspective. How do you approach? Let's start with a forest fire. How do you approach a forest fire or really any disaster? You're at the office. You get your camera gear ready. What are you doing to prepare to go out to this location? What are you looking for when you get out there? How does it personally affect you to be out there, and kind of how do you sort of choose your shots when you're sort of done at the end of the day?
Sure, it's a lot of questions. I think each one of those I could spend a good amount of time on. But to sort of break that off into segments, each type of disaster has its own set of preparations and its own set of like logistical challenges in order to be able to get the right types of photos. Fire itself is a whole world. So let me ask you instead which one you want me to start with. What type of disaster?
Well, since we're talking about forest fires, let's start with the campfire.
Okay. So in talking about fires, there's a small group of fire photographers that up in Northern California, and we regularly chase these things. So we know what to look for. We're pretty well connected in terms of listening to local scanner feeds and checking Twitter and some other sources. And so when red flags happen, a red flag is basically when like the National Weather Service will issue a red flag, which basically means that it's high temperatures, it's very hot, it's very dry, and there's windy conditions expected. That's a prime time for fires to get out of control. Fire, you don't know when a fire is going to happen. Obviously, it's relatively unpredictable, but if it does happen under those conditions, it's very likely it could be completely out of control. And those are the things that we watch for. So during red flags, I'll kind of keep close tabs on whether or not fires break out. CAL FIRE issues alerts, as do a couple of other agencies. And if something does break out, and say it's like 500 acres or so, I might start listening to the scanner feed and hearing how it's going. There's a few triggers that I look for. I can tell you the exact combination of things I look for on a fire that I'd be willing to cover. One would be at least 500 acres. 2 would be when there's expected windy conditions, because obviously fire is going to go wherever the wind goes. 3 would be if there's mandatory evacuations, and if it's a relatively populated area. and under those conditions, I will consider going to it. I guess 4 would be if it's within less than a 5-hour drive, which most fires are. But it's worth mentioning because the first, I'd say, 5 to 10 hours of a fire breaking out is the peak time. That's when things are completely out of control and things are just insane. That's when I want to be there. So that's how I start approaching the fires. Once I'm actually on the road, I wear what firefighters wear. I have the yellow Nomex fire suit, goggles, gloves, helmet, fire shelter, like everything. And in the state of California, press is actually allowed to go virtually anywhere within the fire scene. So we're kind of on our own out there.
Do you have anything on your suit that identifies you as press, or is it just?
I wear a press pass.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not. It's not like I'm masquerading as a firefighter. Like it's right there on display, and I got my cameras out. It's pretty obvious that I'm a photographer.
No, absolutely. I just thought maybe you have like a on the back where it says press or something like that, like stitched on. Because I gotta imagine like a press pass that's plastic will melt. Are you in like heat areas? Or I mean, I don't know. Again.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely. No, it definitely gets really, really hot. If I'm in a place where my press pass is melting, it's probably a little bit too close. I don't wear like a big vest that says press on the back. Quite frankly, I'd rather be a little bit more inconspicuous.
Right.
Similar to what I was talking about with the protests, it's especially true during fires. I don't want to draw attention to myself. I want to be as invisible as possible. I don't want to call any attention away from the firefighters doing their job. I just want to be an invisible fly on the wall if possible.
You mentioned the suit you wear. What about your camera gear? Are you doing anything special either in bringing specific gear or preparing your gear in some way to shoot, a firefight or, fire?
Not really. I always make sure to bring my chargers and everything that I would need because sometimes I'm out there for 3 to 5 days at a time.
Wow.
I sleep in my car because you could just forget about getting a hotel. Like usually entire towns are evacuated and all the evacuees and firefighters are going to take the hotels. So I just sleep in my car. In fact, I got a Toyota 4Runner specifically for fires.
Yeah.
And I chose the year that I have because the back folds flat. And because I'm 6'5" and I measured a number of vehicles, I wanted to make sure I could get one that I would fit well in. Right. So in terms of actual camera gear, most of the shots that I take are done with either 70 to 200 or 17 to 35. I get in really close, so the wide angles are really useful. And then 70 to 200 is obviously great. I also bring my super long lens and my 300 just in case. And on the rare instances that I'll use it, it would be for like an airdrop that's really far away, maybe over a hillside, but I want to get way in close. So that is good for the long lenses. But for the most part, 17 to 35 and 70 to 200. And we don't use flash. Obviously, fire creates its own light. So there's a lot of silhouettes.
Plus, I'm sure that would irritate the firefighters.
Have you been in a situation where you were like, I'm in over my head on this one?
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yeah, have you been in a situation where you were like, man, I'm in over my head on this one?
Not a situation where I didn't feel that I had an exit. Mm-hmm. Usually we tend to, and I say we, I'm talking about the fire photographers, we tend to try and travel in groups of 2s, sometimes 3s, for safety purposes. It's helpful to have one person navigating and one person kind of looking out. There are circumstances where sometimes we're just off on our own. While I was at the campfire, I did have a couple of close calls where I guess briefly, I didn't think I'm in over my head. I actually thought, I got to get the hell out of here right now. In that circumstance, I was pulled up. This was kind of in the peak burn time of the campfire. I'm in downtown Paradise. The entire town is on fire at this point. I'm pulled up in the middle of a road, in the middle of a 4-way intersection. There's buildings burning on all 4 corners, and there's intense wind gusting to like maybe 50 miles an hour. So at this point, I get out of my car. I see huge flames and burning buildings and burning cars. I take a couple photos. The wind shifts and goes right toward me to where it turns so black with smoke you can't see your hand in front of your face. So I get back in the car, wait like 5 seconds, get out, take a couple more shots, get back in. I do that a couple times, but it was a little sketchy. Then out of the corner of my eye, I see some a street signal, like red light, green light, street signal, shaking violently, and power lines shaking violently, and I realize they're all coming down, and I'm like, there's some not directly over me, but I just need to get out of there. So I like hop in the car, flip it in reverse, floored it. I was using my backup camera because I couldn't see anything because of the smoke.
Oh my god!
And backed up like maybe not that far, like maybe 50 yards, until I felt more comfortable, and then just kind of stopped for a bit and gathered my thoughts. Like, that was a little sketchy. I can't say for certain that a power line would have fallen on me, because I don't think I was underneath one, but I was alone at that point, and it was like a little beyond my comfort level. Usually if there's not a huge amount of wind, then you have more like latitude to move about. You can sort of predict what's going to happen. But it was still like some of those wild conditions. So one other thing happened just a minute or so later. So I go ahead and go forward and turn onto another street to get like a little distance where I could watch the scene from a little bit further away and try and compose my shot. Then a fire whirl shows up like right in front of me on the street, which is like a little mini fire tornado. If you've ever seen dust devils out in the middle of the desert, this one was about maybe 10 feet wide and I don't know, a couple 100 feet tall. And the way I could recognize it was because it was filled with embers. So I just see this like whirl of embers spinning around on the street. And like for a split second, I'm thinking, do I photograph this? Yeah, like and I'm in the car, engine's on, my camera's around my neck. I'm like, do I shoot this or do I get out of here? Like, I'm not quite sure what to do here. Because I was alone and because of what had happened at the car fire in Reading, I didn't want to take a chance. So I backed out. I didn't take the shot, and it actually came right over my car and just went right through me. And it wasn't a big deal. It was fine, but I just didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah. So those were a couple sketchy moments.
So you bring up an interesting point about, obviously what you're doing has a level of danger associated with it. I mean, you're in the middle of a fire, or even on the outskirts of it. Are there any statistics, or have you lost have you lost any colleagues, or have you heard about any colleagues who have been lost doing this job?
Photographers, no. We tend to be pretty good about being safe. Mostly, I would attribute it to the fact that we don't have to be there. We can back out if we need to. And I think that that short story was a great example of that, because if I was a firefighter, I might be obligated to stay there and continue evacuating people, but I'm not, so I could just back out. So as long as we have at least one exit, and ideally we're in twos, and we're just kind of keeping an eye on things, and typically we're okay. The thing that does scare me the most, though, are felled trees and power lines, and getting stuck between them while fire is approaching and not being able to get out. That's my biggest fear, more than flames.
Now, do you develop a relationship or a camaraderie with the firefighters, either during or before? Because of course, when you're out there, you don't want to be a detriment to them. You don't want to be holding them back or be someone that they have to rescue later. Is that something that you do actively, or are you just basically trying to not get in their way and stick in the background? Like, do you engage with them?
The latter. We try and stay as invisible as possible. Sometimes we chat with them a little bit, but usually it's online that we'll develop a relationship, because in addition to filing the photos, typically we'll post some on social media, on Facebook or something, and they'll get shared among a bunch of firefighters and online firefighter communities. And people will sometimes recognize themselves in the photos, and we'll get emails where they're asking if we can send a couple frames. And of course, we're happy to give them for free. We're not, trying to make a bunch of money off firefighters and stuff. So relationships can develop that way. I did have last year? Sometimes the fires just kind of blend into one another. I had one circumstance where I had captured some photos of these firefighters rescuing an American flag from a house with impending flames approaching. And that photo kind of went viral. And there were articles written about the firefighters who rescued the flag. It was kind of like this symbolic, save the flag, the house is going to burn. It didn't end up burning, but the house is going to burn, save the flag. And so these firefighters ended up like going on TV shows and getting interviewed, and we had communication and sort of connected that way. Ironically and tragically, the firefighter who had rescued the flag from that photo, I just found out lost his house during the campfire in a totally unrelated incident. So like we had been chatting about that. So that sucks.
Oh, yeah.
I think I found the image. I'm going to bring it up here for our viewers,
Okay.
but just before I do, it looks like 3 firefighters. One is reaching up to a balcony to grab the American flag. Is that the shot you're talking about? It's like orange?
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh.
Okay. I'll share this with our viewing audience so everybody can see that. Yeah, it's definitely a neat shot. Definitely very powerful. And you're obviously right in the middle of it. You got the orange haze. I mean, that's naturally right. What you're there, right? You're seeing all that orange around you. It's not at all embellished or color corrected.
If you were to look at the raw, it would look almost exactly the same. I mean, I cropped a tiny bit in and did a very small amount of level adjustments, but it's like I try and do a very minimal amount of editing.
Nice. Okay, great. So you shot your shot. You're covering your work. You're filing from your car, I presume.
Usually, yeah.
How are you eating? Are you bringing food with you? You give her some hot dogs and marshmallows, or are you just basically
beef jerky, like tons of beef jerky and coffee.
Lots of barbecue. No better.
It's usually whatever I can get at a gas station along the way up, because like I don't have a refrigerator in my car. Like
right.
I'll usually stop at a gas station, like my last stop before going into the fire, and buy like a bunch of packs of beef jerky, bananas if they have it, like 5 iced coffees, and like a couple gallons of water, and I'm just gonna live on that until I go out. But occasionally you can go out like at the end of the night or in the morning, and photographers will get together and find the closest restaurant. We'll like talk about what we experienced and have food together, which is nice.
Waffle House.
Have you ever heard of MREs?
Oh, I've heard of them, yeah.
Okay. So that's what I would tell you. It's just if it were for me, I'd probably have a box MREs in my car, and I would just, pull that out and whenever, feeling the need. Because those things.
What's the fun of that though? Like beef jerky and snacks and stuff, It's like.
Okay.
It's good.
True that.
Large,
well, the good thing about MREs too is you eat one and you don't want to eat another, so you can last forever on one box.
And you have to go to the bathroom for like 4 days, so.
Meals refusing to exit.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
So
I don't really think about food a lot when I'm at fires though. Like you're running on adrenaline so much that like often I would just forget to eat for like 20 hours. You just keep going,
So you're shooting, you're filing from the scene a lot of times. Do you ever file back at the station, or do you file, you do everything? And how do you do that if like power lines are down? I mean, are communication towers down? I mean, how are you filing from the scene, or you just drive as far as you can so you get hit some sort of signal?
Exactly. Usually I use a Wi-Fi hotspot. I'll use my iPhone, and whenever I have a signal, I'll just connect my laptop to my phone. But I do have kind of a funny story if you want to hear it. Please. About sort of an equipment disaster that happened at the campfire.
Sure.
Usually I don't have like major accident situations, but that same day, actually probably the same hour when the power lines came down and everything was crazy and I was at that intersection, about 20 minutes later I was driving down the road, going like maybe 15 miles an hour, looking at various buildings on fire, trying to decide what to shoot. And out of nowhere, there were power lines right across the road at eye level, right at my windshield. So I slam on the brakes. But let me tell you, earlier, probably about an hour earlier, I had taken photos of a hospital being evacuated, a couple of elementary schools burning down, and those photos were on my laptop. I was trying to file the photos, but I couldn't get a good signal because everything's just messed up. Like the cell towers, everything was burning. So I figured I would continue to try to file the photos while driving. So my laptop was on the passenger floor area of my 4Runner, and my cameras were on the passenger seat for easy access. So I'm driving. So these power lines are there. I slam on the brakes, and you can guess what happened next. Oh. The cameras fly off the seat, crack my laptop screen. No. Spider web of colors. I can't see anything. I'm like, I was really, okay, expletive, I'm done. I'm done. I got to leave the fire. Like, I can't even file these photos. My laptop is dust. I don't know what to do. And I was really stressed out because there was still so much to shoot. And so, fast forward, I'll spare you all the details of the story. Unbelievably, I found a Best Buy electronics store that was 35 minutes from where the fire was. And they sold MacBooks.
Without Noraville?
So, it was in Chico.
Oh, Chico. Yeah.
In Chico. So I drove there immediately, ran in with all smelled like a fireplace, all my gear. People are like freaked out. Like, what the hell is this guy doing? I'm like, do you sell MacBook Pros?
Evacuate the Best Buy.
Yeah. I need a MacBook Pro right now. So within an hour, I had a new $2,000 mistake MacBook Pro. And the cool thing is that I took my busted laptop, which still worked, but the screen didn't work.
Yeah.
And I connected it using an HDMI cable to one of their TVs that they had for sale, so I could see the information on my laptop. Oh, and I actually filed the photos using one of the TVs at Best Buy while they were ringing me up for the new laptop. It was like the most stressful and complicated situation. So I got those photos out, and within an hour, had my new laptop, and I was on my way back to the fire.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Did it have to be the MacBook Pro? You couldn't have gotten the MacBook Air?
To be honest, I intended on returning it anyway.
Okay.
I asked them what the return policy was, and they were like, you have 90 days. And I'm like, okay, just give me the best one you have. And
unless it has fire damage or it smells like smoke, and then we're not taking it back.
Right. So I was like, okay, I just need to make sure to not let this happen again. Otherwise, it's going to cost a lot more money.
Yeah. That's an interesting point because, are you doing this freelance, or are you working for a newspaper, or how are you supporting your ability to cover these fires?
So I'm freelance, and that's a good question because news doesn't pay very much. Like, very, very low.
What? Why am I just now learning this?
I'm really sorry to burst all of your amazing dreams and fantasies of being the photographer that travels around the world and still can afford to buy a house in the Bay Area, but it's very unlikely.
I was told photojournalism is a 6-figure. Now, of course, you have the figures after the period, so it's the 4 figures than the 2, but it's still. Anyways, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So let me put it this way: a typical day rate for a freelance news photographer is going to be about $275, and in some cases they'll cover expenses. For fires, yes, they'll cover expenses. That's pretty standard. Expenses are going to be like miles at 48 cents a mile or whatever it is. Food if you're spending the night. Sometimes they'll cover hotels. It varies from agency to agency. But on average, as a freelance news photographer, I'm probably only going to work 2-3 days a week doing news. So it's not even close to being able to support myself, especially in the Bay Area where the average house is like 1.2 million, right? Forget it. There's just no way I'm going to be living on the streets, which is why 75% of my workflow is corporate events and headshots. Now, this is where that enters, because if it wasn't for that piece of the puzzle, for that bread and butter portion of my career, I wouldn't be able to afford to go and do news. So I don't really do it for the money. Don't tell my editors that I don't really care about the money, but I care about getting something for my time. But the reality is I can make 10 times what I make on an average daily news shoot for half the amount of time for a corporate event.
And a lot less risk.
Yeah. It's boring. I'm like shooting for hours, people talking heads at podiums and people smiling while they sip their martinis and talk about things during their fireside chat with no fire, stuff like that. Yeah, it's boring, but it's good money. And honestly, I think doing the corporate events tends to balance me out emotionally too. Because like when you think about news, like 80% of it is negative, right? Like people are going to be crying and angry and all these negative emotions. There are some happy ones, but most news tends to be negative. It's just kind of how it goes. And most corporate events are happy, even if it's fake happy. It's like, we want to see people smiling as they're drinking and smiles at this. So like, it kind of balances me out,
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, if you're just doing nothing but disasters and death and destruction, and I have to imagine that would weigh on you after a while. That was what I want to know is like, how do these firefighters? How does it go? How does it weigh on you to kind of go into these areas where you're seeing just desolation and destruction and houses and lives ruined and potentially death? I mean, how does that? How do you cope with that? Or is that just, again, like you said, do you just kind of you're able to balance that with the corporate job?
Yeah, it's a good question. For the most part, I don't tend to get like super emotionally affected. Usually, the camera is sort of like an emotional barrier for me. Like I'm so focused on getting the shot that usually my inner monologue is so loud that it overrides my emotions. Like it might be imagine I'm at a scene where people are mourning the loss of somebody who died. I might be looking around and in my head, I'm thinking, okay, who's going to cry? Who's going to cry? Like this person has their hand on their head. Maybe they'll do it again. Like just constant, like I'm hearing this voice in my head as I'm thinking about what I want to look for. And often it's not until I stop shooting or I put my camera down that I actually feel the emotion. Or in some cases, it's days later when I look back at the photos that I can really connect to the experiences that I had. However, the exception to that would be during this campfire, when I saw some scenes that were the most gruesome thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Do you know a little about this, or is this new to you?
No,
I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. So during the campfire, there were a couple like blog articles that were written about it, which is why I was asking if you had heard about it. So during the campfire, the flames are for the most part out. The next piece of the puzzle is recovery, right? The rescue operations, the searching for survivors and bodies and things like that. In the past, most of these wildfires in Northern California, sometimes people die. I mean, it's horrible whenever it happens, but usually it's rare. Like a couple people died, that's awful. 5 people died, that's really bad. The campfire is extraordinary. I mean, 88 people died. It was insane. So on one of the days, I was up there for 10 days. On one of the days, I was driving around and came across a hearse, which I followed. And that led me to a scene where there were rescue workers, and I was unbelievably able to gain access to be able to photograph them searching. This was the first one. I was the first one to see this. And I sent a note to some of my other photographer buddies to let them know this was happening. And the very first spot that we stopped at was the most gruesome. It was a burned home, and there was a piece of a collapsed tin roof, and they peeled it open to reveal this completely charred body. And I will never, ever forget the look that was, I think it was a woman, but I'll never forget the look that was on her face, because I think her eyelids were burned off and her lips were burned off, but she was like gritting her teeth, and her knuckles were down like on the cement in a position like I could almost imagine the moment she was dying, and like it looked like the expression on her face was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die in a fire, and it was stuck there. And I actually like put my camera down over my neck for a moment and took a sigh and was like, oh my God, like oh my God, this is really bad, Yeah. And then tried to gather myself. I was like shaking, holding the camera, shaking, and tried to steady myself, grabbed a bunch of photos. But the thing is, after all of that, I had showed the other photographers because I was the only one that got that. And that put me in a very ethically confusing position where I had to decide if I file these photos or not. Yeah. And first I called my editor, and I was working for AFP, which, as you may know, Agence France Presse, they're based in Europe, so they have less, they're less conservative than the US agencies, right? And my editor said, we will take all the photos that don't show the face. If it doesn't show the face, we'll take them, we'll move them. After talking to all my photographer buddies and a couple other editors, it was a really tough decision. I decided not to file those photos. And the thought was that if I filed them, they'd go all over the wire, might end up on the cover of a newspaper. Some person would likely see those images and be like, that's my mom, that's my wife, that's you know, whoever it was. And I know this person, and I didn't know if they survived or not because people are evacuated. They don't know what's going on. But to like discover that someone that you love died by seeing a picture of them burned, like, I just couldn't get behind it. I had a really hard time with it because I thought it was likely that an image like that would be the photo of the fire that would be the most impactful, and it could have been on the cover of the New York Times, and I just don't know. But I had to like set my ego aside, and I just sat on them, and it was really hard. It's still to this day, it's hard. Like, I have these photos that I think are incredibly impactful that make you like feel something powerful, but I just can't do anything with them.
What do you guys think of that? Do you think he should have sessioned those photos, or do you think he was right in not? I mean, obviously, there's no right or wrong answer. You made the decision that you had to make, but what do you guys think?
It's definitely one of the worst ethical questions you have to ask yourself, and I think he went straight through the process what I would have gone through, and thinking that that's the last image that a family member or a loved one would see of their deceased person. Yeah, I understand not showing the face and all that stuff, and holding back that picture. And I know certainly, like when I was down at 9/11, and you know, have images that I still haven't put up, and yeah, you just it's sometimes it's just more important, the humanity of it and the empathy of it, than actually just showing the picture that is an amazing picture. But I also think there's time, you know, that there's going to be 20 years from now when people look back on this, and maybe then it's good to bring it back out and really kind of bring the gravity and the new thing, because after all that time, it's something new to show that will really kind of not let it be forgotten. And sometimes those things shouldn't be forgotten. And 20 years, you know, from now, that could be an important picture.
Ron, how about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, same here. You know, with my agency, with my network, I'm pretty sure they would run. The Philippines has a different standard than America does with news. We see a lot of blood on TV over there. Guys get shot, and they pretty much show what happened over there. It's different.
Same thing in Mexico.
But I don't cover. Yeah, right. Same thing.
I was down in Texas visiting my family, and we were watching like Mexican TV in America, you know, in Texas and whatever. And they don't hold anything back. It's like, here, we killed these drug dealers, we killed these, you know, gangsters, and like just no censorship whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, my own network, I think we blur faces if something like that happens. But you see a stack of dead, but you still see a stack of dead bodies, and I guess
yeah.
I don't know what the rules are about that, but I see sometimes they have blurred faces or whatever.
Okay, so here's another aspect to consider with that. This wasn't the only scene that I saw. I did come across another one where there was a man who died, and his body was laying face down between two vehicles, and he was partially burned. And I tried to take photos in a way that would make him more anonymous, but he was still wearing shoes and socks. He was still wearing a shirt and shorts. I don't know why he was only partially burned, like on the calf area, but anybody who saw those photos who knew this guy would have recognized his clothes. They would have recognized his shoes. They might have recognized the vehicles he was between and could have identified him. And so, so two things. One, I spoke with a photographer named Justin Sullivan. He works for Getty Images, and he was out shooting Katrina. and was tasked one time with photographing dead bodies. And he filed one, and the editor was like, "What is this? I can't use this." And they instructed him to try to shoot limbs instead of the entire body, because what he ended up filing in that circumstance was a photo of a hand. So if you just see the burned or hand of a body, you don't know who it is. It still has relatively the same amount of impact. But I just couldn't do that in this circumstance because of the way the scene was set up. In the first body, it just, well, I'll spare you all the details, but it just didn't work. And so here's another aspect to this in making this tough ethical decision. It was an incredibly rare circumstance that the rescue workers and sheriff officers were allowing me and eventually other photographers to be there as they were searching for human remains. Typically, they will completely close it off and keep us blocks away, and we can't come close. But we were right in there. So here's another question. If I were to file those photos of a body and the law enforcement agency got flack for it, would they cut off our access for future fires? That's something the photographers and I were talking about. Is this a risk that's worth taking in filing this? Here's another question. What if the photo was used by lawyers going after PG&E? Because as you may know, PG&E is filing for bankruptcy because of the extraordinary cost of these fires. What if a lawyer wanted to get a hold of these photos and try and use them to go after PG&E? Or what if I don't know. There's so many aspects that I got so confused that because I couldn't decide, I just did nothing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have no idea what I would do in that situation because I've never been in that situation, to photograph dead bodies in a fire. But playing the devil's advocate here, my stance, or again, playing the devil's advocate stance, would be to get these photos out there, if only because we always hear about forest fires, right? We always see sort of the far away long shots, maybe some smoke, maybe some firefighters doing putting out fire, but we never see, or maybe we don't see enough, the death and destruction that these fires cause. And maybe that would, like you said, be more impactful on the general public, and knowing that, hey, maybe we should do something more. Maybe we should be more proactive about what we can do to prevent forest fires in the future. Because hey, look, this is the death toll that comes, especially when you're talking about a forest fire, like you said, like Camp Fire, where it was extraordinarily deadly, with 88 people being dead. I mean, I don't think of that my personal mindset, I don't think of that forest fire any different than any other forest fire. It's just every year, it's oh, yeah, forest fires in California, yep, and earthquakes and mudslides and everything else. And it's more of it's just a running gag, really, than anything serious. We don't think of it as, a deadly, such a deadly thing, and people can die. And maybe seeing more death, more destruction, more human impact would really encourage those people who live in those areas. Hey, when you hear about fires coming to your area, I don't know if there's fire warning systems or something, but perhaps people would take those warnings more seriously to get out of the path of a incoming fire and to evacuate. Just like when you see, death and destruction from a hurricane or any other natural disaster, there's always people who are like, I'll ride out this hurricane, I'm not going to evacuate. And then, you always hear about people dying. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe seeing that would have more impact, and there is the balance there. I don't think it would be fair for firefighters, and really, can they deny your access or cut off access to these natural disasters?
They can. So yes, legally, the members of the media can go anywhere. However, the one caveat to that is that firefighters are allowed to say, "You are impeding this operation. We are demanding that you are removed," and they can call the police and say, "These photographers need to be moved because they're preventing us from doing our job." That's kind of their ace up the sleeve. If they want us out, they can have us out. So we kind of need to mind the balance that we have, and in them allowing us to be there and us respecting what they do. So we don't want to rock the boat too much. So
I think that brings up even more ethical questions, because it's You know,
Yeah.
it's like
It's complicated. Though, like shooting fires, that's one of the things that's fascinating about this. It's not just visually sensational and horrific and emotional and all of the things that you would expect. There's a lot of ethical issues. I mean, there's a lot of dead animals, a lot, and like deciding what to file and what not to file is a really like case. I have to take it on a case by case basis. Like, I got a lot of flack one year for filing a photo of a dead horse. There was a dead horse just on the side of a road, and it died because of, I don't know, it might have been smoke inhalation, but it was clearly because of the fire. And I got death threats. Like, I had people writing me saying that I was an awful human being, and expletive, like
you're like, guys, I didn't kill the horse. I just took a picture of it.
Right, but like, how could you take a photo of this as someone's family member? Like, how could you do this? And like, I think about that sometimes when I think about whether or not I should file a photo of a body, because today it's different than it used to be in that you file a photo to a newswire and it's not just a one-sided conversation. It's not just information's out there, it's consumed, there's no response possible. Now there's social media. It's easy to find the photographer. It's easy to send notes. There's social media. It's complicated, and it muddies the waters of what ethically should be allowed and what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Either of you guys been in any situations like that? Similar, different, any ethical situations?
No, but but before we move to any other topics with Josh, I grew up outside of Paradise. I spent my high school years on Clark Road. I lived down on Clark Road, so the area. So that's why, I know Arrowville, Chico, Durham. All those guys. All those guys out there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
So I'm watching your stuff. It's really personal to me. But it's been 30 years since I've lived there.
Yeah.
Still.
I mean it. It must have been beautiful. I don't know. I mean, if it was still there.
Well, we used to ride our bikes up the hill to Paradise.
Yeah.
As best we could, and we could not walk, right? And then we come down that steep hill outside Clark Road there, coming down Clark Road. Just whee, So we go up there to Paradise. It was great. Snow up there. We go play with the snow. Go up there to Paradise. Yeah. It was beautiful. Real beautiful territory.
And what irony, right? That
Paradise, right.
I mean, come on.
Went to hell, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Paradise Lost, huh? But I'm
right, Paradise Lost. That's it, boy. Well, originally on the subject of Paradise, it was a gambling town, and it was Paradise. That's serious. Serious. It was Paradise. It was a gambling town back in the mining days, and that's all gold country up there. Oroville. Oroville means oro is gold in Spanish. Ville is town. Yeah. So it was all gold country, and Paradise, Paradise, yeah. Wow. And they changed it later on. They wanted when they became a town, they weren't always. They were I don't know what the deal was, but when they became a town in the 80s, it was a big deal. Oh, we're a town now. Anyway, Paradise history.
Nice. Well, I'd love to talk about the ethical ramifications about what we publish. But
time to run.
Speaking of fires, it sounds like Ron's building is going to go up on fire.
What's your address? I'll come shoot it.
It's in Hawaii, so get your plane ticket. But I'm sure we could talk about this for another hour. But we do need to move on to much more critically important things like tripods. But we are also nearing the end of our show time. But I did want to touch on tripods really quick, since I'd love to touch a little bit on gear before we bounce out of this week's show, since we won't really have time to talk about any of the other topics. So Zach got a video tripod for his work. I'd love to have had him on to talk about that, but he's not here tonight. So let's just talk about tripods in general. I've got photo tripods. I've got video tripods. Obviously, I use them for different things. Do you find or use tripods in your work in general? We'll throw it over to you, Josh. Do you use tripods at all?
Sure. Yeah. I use not that often, only for long exposures at night, really. And I do bring a tripod with me when I shoot fires, not to keep it only on fire, but that is a time when I will use tripods more often than others. Sometimes there's not a lot of light in the sky, and there's just a smoldering home, and you can't see much. And when you do it on a tripod and do a 5-second exposure, it really brings the entire scene to life, and you can see light where you may not have seen it with your own eyes. You can do long exposures in ways that that make a scene look a little bit more compelling, especially when you see like smoke moving across. It almost looks like a painter's brush sort of going across a canvas. So yeah, I definitely use it at fires and for nighttime stuff.
Question on that: where does, in a journalistic kind of a long exposure is more kind of artistic? Where does that fall into changing, not changing? On your viewpoint on that?
What do you mean, like in terms of ethics or what?
It's you're taking something that's not a moment. You're taking a long time, and it's a span of time. Things change in the picture. I mean, I'm just curious what you're feeling on a long exposure versus a quick snapshot of a moment.
So, like, I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Do you
like,
think there's anything different in showing someone a long exposure as a piece of news event opposed to a snapshot?
Sometimes a long exposure is necessary in order to accurately and fully show what the scene looks like. Your human eye is going to piece together a bunch of snapshots, right? I'm in particular thinking of a scene where I'm watching fire way across on a hillside. Smoke is kind of blowing across. I could take a quick shot, but it doesn't quite show the smoke clouds moving across. But a long exposure is going to show a lot more. It's going to bring the light out in certain areas. But sort
of my thought on that is it's not exactly what you're seeing at the moment. It's something that you would never see without a long exposure. Just doesn't exist. It does that moment true. Doesn't exist. So that's sort of my feeling on how do you kind of feel on that.
It's true. You could make the argument that a long exposure is not what your eye sees, and therefore it's not representing truth. But the ethical standard typically is if it's something that you can do in camera, then it's fair game. But if it's something that you can't do in camera, like you have to edit something in Photoshop in order to make something look a certain way, that isn't really fair game.
Yeah.
And then it gets a lot more complicated too. Like technically you're taking a photo with whatever size sensor you have, which is a slice of the overall scene. And when you crop a photo even further, you're cutting out certain elements. All those things are sort of changing truth in a way. So that's why I say like the mark should really be like what you can do in camera should kind of be where the line is.
Sure, it's like we have a lot of tools like Flash. Flash doesn't exist in the real world,
right?
But it's a tool that we use to...
Well, some people also don't like Flash for photojournalism. They think it changes the scene too. So
right. I guess it depends on how much of a purist you are, right?
Yeah.
For me, I abide by not necessarily the technical purist, but more the like. As a journalist, I don't want to affect the scene. So I want things to be as they are as much as possible, unless it's a portrait, in which case, I'll position lights in a bunch of places and tell people to do things because I'll indicate that it's a portrait. Yeah. But otherwise, I don't think it's wrong to use a tripod to make something look differently. I also don't think it's wrong to light a scene to make something look differently. I think if it's something that you can do with the camera in camera, then it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, you could take that argument to the logical ends of the earth and say, well, technically your eyes don't zoom, so why are you shooting anything with size of 50 millimeter? Because that's true. That's the only one that represents your field of vision. So if you can do it with the equipment prescribed, then you're fine. It's when you actually start to manipulate that photo after the fact, or you're directing what's going on in the photo, then it starts to become extremely unethical.
Right. And that argument can go like forever, because you look at iPhones with the two lenses and creates a blur, but it's done in camera. Technically, it's like it gets really complicated.
Cameras
I
that can
just
see in the dark, it's like that,
Yeah, like Google has that night shot
Yeah.
thing. That thing's
Yeah.
amazing what you can do there. Do you use tripods in your work, Travis, at all?
all the time, and I'm always looking at different tripods, whether it's for video or whether it's for travel or whether it's for studio work. So I mean, I'm like, it's for me, it's like trying to find the perfect camera bag. There's just isn't one, so I have many, and too many. So I'm always trying new ones. And
Same here.
Too
many camera bags, too many tripods, too much of everything. Really, I gotta sell. I gotta get minimalist and sell all my stuff. But each one has its own purpose. Each one has its own use.
You usually find the travel ones that are lighter don't quite go up as high and not as stable, and then the ones that are carbon fiber and stuff like that cost you. So you have to invest in I think one really good carbon fiber and one really good travel one, and you'll be pretty good. But most of the time people don't want to spend that much money on a really right stuff or a Manfrotto or something like that. It just hurts to spend $700-800 on a pair of legs. But if you add up all the times you buy the cheap ones, and if you really use it, it's worth doing it.
Yeah.
And it saves your back, right? I mean, even 5 pounds makes a big difference if you're walking around for hours and hours.
Huge, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I got a travel tripod for video from Benro, and that thing's beautiful. I love that thing. But I use this cheapy little $100 Manfrotto tripod with like this head that you have a little knob, and you just kind of like can move it anywhere around.
That little gun one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's horrible for like shooting video where you want to shoot like panning shots or anything, but in terms of just light and ease of use, it's not bad. Ron, I'm sure you use tripods for your video work, right?
For video, yeah, just video, not my stills usually. Sometimes, but like what Josh was saying, long exposures. If we have a storm and there's lightning or something, I want to try to get lightning, something like that.
Yeah.
But I understand what Travis is saying too about the ethics of it. Long exposures, that comes up a lot in my mind. It's just a hairy situation. We talk about photo ethics, and what I can duplicate that in Photoshop. Why isn't it the same with my camera? What is there a difference if I use Photoshop than if I did my camera? Is it a big deal? If nobody knows, is it a big deal?
It is. To me, I mean,
I hear you. No,
it's the difference between it's not photography. It becomes
it's
graphic
manipulation,
art.
right? It's photo manipulation, but same thing. Okay, so I took a long exposure and I had the car zipping by. Okay, there was that little blue and red lights in that thing, man. That's a car that zipped by, and your camera made it look like little blue and red lights zipping by. Big bars of red and blue. That didn't exist in real life. That's not ethical. Anyway.
But if it's done in camera, it's still a photograph.
No, I hear you, and that is the standard.
You're getting real tough there because now they're coming out with cameras that have editing features like Lightroom and Photoshop in the camera.
Yeah,
I swear I did it all in camera. I did it all in camera.
Right. Now that muddies the waters.
Exactly.
Darkroom techniques, guys. Darkroom techniques.
Technology is going to keep advancing, and we kind of have to.
Yeah, for the record, I think the Google Night site is perfectly fine.
I
that is totally unethical.
Someone else didn't
that
agree.
Is in-camera photo manipulation right there. That's stacking of imagery.
That's exactly what you're doing with the time lapse or something like that.
Well, time lapse is one frame of a shot extended over time. Night shot specifically is a series of photos, and they're just
over time, just compiled together.
Right. It's a series of photos. It's doing all the photo manipulation in the camera to give you that thing, but it's still photo. I would never accept that photograph. Like if somebody gave me a Google Night shot, I would say, well, I'm not going to publish that because that is just like I would never publish one of those dual, blurry, fake bokeh photos from a camera phone, which is why there's so much importance with hiring true professionals like Josh, who are out there doing the work as opposed to the citizen journalism argument.
Here's the bottom line, guys. Like, nothing is wrong. Technically, whatever you do, whether it's in camera or done in a computer, it's art. Anything can be done as long as you disclose what it is. If it was, by definition, a photograph is taken in camera, right? I mean, granted, there can be a small amount of editing done, but like, is it a photograph or is it a piece of graphic art? Like, as long as you disclose what it is, if you disclose that it's a portrait, if you disclose
Google Night Shot,
right. If you say shot with Google Night Shot, then like in my opinion, I think that makes it okay. I mean, not for news, but for whatever else, you know?
Well,
so
for whatever else, you can do whatever the hell you want. We are kind of talking for news.
Yeah.
All right, what?
I fall in the whatever else category. I do whatever else on a daily basis.
All right, well, I think that's going to end this week's show. We are at about an hour and 15 minutes. So throw it to you, Josh. What would you like to direct people towards?
Sure. If you'd like to connect with me, feel free to go to my website. I think you'll put a link on there, right?
Absolutely.
It's just edelsonphotography.com. I'll throw a link for my Instagram as well. Feel free to email me or check out my work. There's a lot of fire photography and also a couple of galleries for my corporate work and my headshots, which is these are all totally other topics. You'll also see a gallery for tornadoes and some other new stuff and some of my travel stuff. So there should be some interesting things to look at if you're curious. And I'm always happy to answer questions if you had something in mind you want to talk to me about.
Yeah, so we didn't even really touch on any other disasters you've been a part of, and I'd really love to talk to you about that. I'm sure we could spend another hour on that.
Easily.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah.
That's right, we'll have to have you back.
Or two.
That's right.
Sure.
All right, Ron, you got anything for us besides the standard? Eagle News.
Yeah, Eagle News. Check out my Tagalog. It's improving.
You got another segment of you speaking the language?
I'm not sending them to you anymore, Dave. You put them on the website.
Oh, man, but they're so entertaining.
They are that.
Travis, you got anything for us?
If you want to check out some of my work or talk to me about gear or anything else, you can reach me at traviswkeys.com or my Instagram is TWKEYES. I'm also the chairman of APA New York, which is American Photographic Artists. And if you want to learn more about what we do, and it's for photographers, by photographers, for photographers. So it's a great organization. Look us up at apa.com. And that's it for me this week.
Alrighty then, great. So good stuff. Like I said, you can check out Zach's open box of the new tripod that he got. That's living on our website and our Facebook page. And after I say the outline, I'm gonna actually play our new outro. So we'll see how that goes, if it actually all works out seamlessly. But
I might play with one at some point. Create something funky,
please,
fun.
By all means, the more the merrier. All right. Thank you so much, Josh, for taking time out to be on our show to talk to our audience about all the cool stuff that you're doing and some great conversation. And for Ron Hamilton and Travis Keys, I am David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, episode 158, and we are out. Thanks for tuning into Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show and hope you'll join us next week. In the meantime, go to AroundTheLens.com for show notes from tonight's episode, as well as links to our Patreon, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. We're also always looking for new and exciting guests to feature on each show, so if you know somebody who might be interested, let them know.